Welcome to another episode of Planet Possible. We're delighted to be with you with more insightful guests and evidence-led discussion about topics that are critical to the way we manage our water and environment. A huge thanks to RSK, who are sponsoring this special episode of the pod, and you'll hear a little more about RSK later. We're really grateful for their support. If you're new to Planet Possible, I'm Niki Roach, and alongside being a passionate advocate for all things water and environment, I'm a fellow of CIWEM, which is the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management. Our members in over 90 countries are professionals with a breadth and depth of expertise in the topics that are shaping the future of our planet. So let's get started, and in today's episode we're doing something a little different. At the recent Flood and Coast Conference, there was a very important, informative and at times moving workshop all about neurodiversity. It featured 4 guest speakers, all with their own stories to tell and advice to pass on for best practice, both within and outside of the workplace. And so the aim of this episode of Planet Possible is to make what was said at that session available to anyone and everyone to hear and benefit from. So let's listen to what the speakers had to say. You'll hear Francesca Brahmbhatt give top tips for line managers, Rai Hastie on the power of networks, and Zoe Brunswick's 5 key areas for employment. But first up, Lea Nightingale. And Lea is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Engagement Officer at CIEEM. And she sets out to answer the question, what is neurodiversity?
Neurodiversity is a term that describes the idea that there is a naturally occurring variation in the human brain which can impact a series of brain functions, such as how we interact with one another or how we process information. While statistics vary, studies suggest that 15 to 20% of us show some form of neurodivergence, and that many of us don't even realise we're neurodivergent. My own neurodivergent abilities began to present during childhood. I was, and still am, an avid reader, but I found my reading speed was slower compared to that of my peers, as I struggled to keep my eyes from jumping around the page, like I am now. I really struggled to focus on written tasks and would procrastinate because I was so anxious of getting things wrong. The classic comment at my parent-teacher evenings was always, "Lea's a really bright child. If only she'd apply herself." I hated these comments because I really felt like I was applying myself. You just couldn't see it in my grades. In place of progressing with my written assignments, I'd hyperfixate on one topic, often cornering unsuspecting teachers and giving them random info dumps on topics completely tangential to what we were discussing in class. After one of these info dumps, an incredibly supportive teacher suggested that I visited the school's learning support team to talk over some of the issues that I was facing, and thus, after several tests, they concluded that I have dyslexia. As a result, I was given extra time and support in class and exams, which we would today call reasonable adjustments. In my early 20s, my acquired neurodivergence began to present, which amplified my applied neurodivergent traits. For me, this has been the most challenging part of understanding and coping with my neurodiversity. I have generalised anxiety disorder, which, as I'm sure many of you can appreciate, makes days like today very exciting. And when it flares up, it's like this fog descends and all of the mechanisms that I've put in place to support myself go out of the window. Even very simple tasks like focusing on a TV show or reading a recipe to make supper become utterly impossible. It's been fascinating to hear people talk about COVID brain fog, because this is exactly what my GAD fog feels like. It's been interesting to see more long COVID conditions now being recognised as forms of acquired neurodivergence. Despite these challenges, I see many strengths in my neurodivergence. As you will no doubt hear from our other speakers, neurodivergent individuals can bring out-of-the-box thinking, offering new opportunities and fresh perspectives. Neurodivergent minds can be questioning, some have extraordinary pattern spotting or problem-solving skills, whilst others have incredible recall for facts, details and distant memories.
Good afternoon everyone, I'm Zoe Brunswick, I'm the Group HR Director at RSK Group. I'm also the Executive Sponsor for our Neurodiversity Network, and I'm a parent to an 11-year-old who's got diagnosed ASD ADHD and a 7-year-old with suspected ASD ADHD. I'm going to talk about 5 key areas from an employment perspective, and I will also share some insights from my parenting experience. So firstly, it's really important to learn from those with lived experiences. Your neurodivergent employees are a great asset in supporting neurodiversity in the workplace. Engage with them and make them part of the change. Encourage the formation of employee networks, forums for neurodivergent employees and allies who can share experiences and build internal support systems. At RSK, we've got 2 networks, one for neurodivergent employees and one for family members who are supporting neurodivergent individuals. Both of these networks have created safe spaces for employees to share with colleagues, and for some this has become a real lifeline as they don't have that support elsewhere. Our network members feel able to share their own experiences and how they have overcome challenges, and this is so valuable to others as it reinforces that you are not alone. Be an employer of choice. So when looking at your company, can neurodivergent individuals get a sense that they'll be supported? Does this feature in your employer brand, in the culture? Are people sharing stories? Is that evident on social media? Look at your recruitment process at all stages and identify where there might be barriers. Simple things, how and where you advertise. So consider carefully the exact skills needed for the role. In recruitment, we can often have key essentials that we apply to all roles, good written communication, but these may inadvertently deter neurodivergent applicants, and we need to consider, are these essential and do they need to be stated in the job advert? You could be missing out on a diverse pool of applicants with some exceptional skills as a result. As we can see on there are many strengths within neurodiversity that lend themselves to roles that require that skill set. Creativity, depth of thinking, visual reasoning, hyper-focus, and therefore be explicit in job adverts and state if this would suit an autistic person, for example. Train your recruitment team and hiring managers, so let's make sure those that are involved in recruitment and interviewing are trained appropriately, otherwise they may inadvertently be discounting neurodivergent applicants. How many times have we heard the CV was poorly written, they didn't make eye contact during an interview? Be upfront about the support on offer for neurodivergent applicants within your recruitment literature and suggest some adjustments that can be offered. So, where are the barriers to inclusion? Look at all stages of the employee experience and really scrutinise your internal processes and procedures. Do you even know who is neurodiverse in your workforce? Are employees comfortable enough to share? Working environment. Have you taken into consideration the needs of neurodivergent employees within your offices, your site-based environments? Our neurodiversity network is currently leading on a project to design workplaces for all, and there's a lot of collaboration between network members who are bringing into play their day jobs, so acoustic technicians, architects, etc., to try and facilitate positive change in the working environment. Work events, so thinking about things like today, it's important that when planning you think about possible barriers to participation and how these can be overcome. Communicate what will be happening at the event and avoid any surprises. And if plans do change, keep people updated. Provide details of the venue in advance, give links to the website so people can visualise it. Career progression. Are there any role models in senior positions to demonstrate what's possible? Can you implement career coaches or mentors to support with career development? Internal communications. Think about the language, style and tone used and how things might be interpreted. We recently had an instance where our health and safety team were putting together a communication about understanding non-verbal communication, and they portrayed some of the neurodivergent traits as negative communication and had not thought about how this might have been received. Thankfully, we were able to get involved and talk to them about it, and it made them more aware for the future. Think about how you can support those with caring responsibilities. Some employees may be caring for neurodivergent individuals, and this can have a massive impact on their daily lives. What support can you offer? Can you offer reduced working hours, greater flexibility, an alternative role that might better suit remote working? You want to try and keep those employees in the workplace because it's going to improve loyalty and it's going to ultimately support their mental health. And finally, day-to-day support. Consider training a few key people to support neurodivergent individuals who may not be able to communicate their needs clearly. Reasonable adjustments. Here's some examples of accommodations which may be helpful to those who are neurodivergent. So having written instructions and information with visual prompts and checklists, larger computer screens so everything is visible so you've got a reduced burden on the memory, assistive technology, e.g. speech to text or text to speech software, visible clocks and timers, but think about maybe sounds as these could either be helpful or distracting, noise cancelling headphones or earplugs, providing increased supervision, planning meetings and frequent check-ins, and helping to structure tasks and provide deadlines, allowing short breaks in between tasks so that can help to increase focus and concentration. And when giving constructive feedback, think about doing this in writing rather than verbally so that there's something for that individual to look at. Think about reducing distractions in the workplace, providing quiet spaces that people can take themselves away to. Finally, drive a culture where neurodiversity is normalised. Educate and raise awareness at all levels, both internally within your organisation, through your networks, regular communications, awareness raising, training, and externally through participation in schools outreach, careers events, work experience which is focused on neurodiversity. If we don't promote what is accessible within the early career settings, then we run the risk of losing potential future talent within our organisations who don't see the workplace as somewhere they can belong. Encourage employees to be open and share their experiences. This is important to show others that they are not alone. One of our managing directors who joined our neurodiversity network recently felt able to disclose that he was dyslexic, and no one around him had known this. This demonstrated to colleagues that he was able to achieve this progression without this holding him back. And recognise that every person is individual, and what works for one may not work for another, so a person-centred approach is key, with compassion and understanding needed. So just a few points from my perspective as a parent of neurodivergent children. So firstly, if anyone in the audience is parenting neurodivergent children or you're waiting a formal diagnosis, I just want to reiterate that you're not alone. If you have concerns about your child, do some more research to evidence any neurodivergent traits. You know your child best. If they're in education, please push for support and ask to be referred to your local CAMS or neurodevelopmental team. Communicate with the school about what works well for your child at home and be forceful in demanding that they put in place provisions to support your child and meet their needs. You may, through this process, recognise neurodivergent traits in yourself, and we have seen an increase in neurodivergence being diagnosed later in life as people become more aware of neurodiversity. This may help you to better understand the needs of your child if it reflects your own needs. Do what is best for your child and don't be afraid to tell people why. I spent so many years isolating myself from others for fear of judgment about my parenting skills, and this is what contributed to my decline in mental health. Being open about my child's needs and why he reacts the way he does helps to educate others. Over time, I've been more confident confronting those who make judgments based on something they can't see and don't understand, in the hope that they will think twice about making assumptions in the future. Please be open with your family, friends, colleagues and employers about the challenges that you're having, and most importantly, take steps to look after your own mental health. Parenting a child with additional needs is challenging, and having a good support system will make all the difference. I know this because 12 months ago I hit rock bottom. Everything was spiralling out of control and I was on the verge of a breakdown, but outwardly no one could tell. Even my husband didn't know how low I was. I spoke to my manager and explained what was going on, and he was very supportive. I reached out to my GP, organised some counselling to help manage my anxiety, and I've been able to develop coping mechanisms and now feel in a much better place. I'm more open with others about my thoughts and feelings, as now this helps them to understand where I'm at mentally so that they can support me when I need it. Finally, please keep talking about neurodiversity within your workplace, with your family and friends. People fear what they don't understand, and they will start to understand if we help them.
This special episode of Planet Possible is sponsored by RSK. They were founded in 1989 and are a responsible, sustainable and knowledgeable business. And that means they're committed to ensuring every employee is heard, celebrated and supported as they build their careers. They're proud to sponsor this episode of Planet Possible on neurodiversity because every colleague has a place in the workforce.
I'm Rai Hastie. I am autistic, was diagnosed at 34. I was diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia at 19. I have generalised anxiety disorder, but then my psychologist told me maybe I don't, maybe I'm just autistic, and that it's quite normal for autistic people to actually have very high levels of anxiety in everyday life because the world's not really designed for us. But I've been asked to talk to you about the importance of networks today, how people can access support, how people can support others, and I'm going to share some of my experiences as well. Because I know this is something that annoys people at times, I just like to get across. I quite often, when I'm talking to people, like to take in what they've said and restate it again in my own words. This isn't to challenge others about what they've said. This is about trying to ensure that I've actually understood what the other person is asking me. But it has in the past come up with problems like I'm trying to explain something to someone in a way that they don't feel it's very positive. So let's talk about networks and why they're important to all staff, as well as the organisations. Staff networks allow us to face common challenges and come together to provide mutual support, where the adaptations in workplace adjustments, can be shared across the network so that people gain an insight and understanding into the kinds of things that are available to support them. One of the biggest challenges for me as a newly diagnosed autistic person was what to ask for. I'd spent the first 34 years of my life struggling with these challenges and just thinking that they were perfectly normal, things that everyone in the world struggled with. The adjustment in other people's expectations was a lot quicker than the adjustment in my own expectations of myself. I'm 42 now and was diagnosed at 34 with autism, and would say that it's only in the last year or so that I've really started to actually accept that I'm autistic, and that means that I need different support to other people. It's been a very long journey from that point of view of kind of trying to get to a point where my own internalised ableism was recognised for that it was ableism, it was expectations that were being placed upon me by society and by myself that were not reasonable. So I've seen massive improvements in people, their work and their working relationships, and that's brought immense value to them and to the organisation. In addition, the networks quite often act as critical friends. So they review documents, processes to ensure that we reduce the inherent biases, not induce, reduce. Don't want to induce anything. I'm going to bring it down. But Lee's already pointed out that I will make mistakes. So there is a problem with HR departments in general, in that it is not a role that neurodiverse people generally are particularly attracted to, particularly autistic people, having to deal with lots of other people. But that means that things like our HR processes have not necessarily taken into account neurodiversity particularly well. I recently became a manager within the Environment Agency and had to go on a training course in the Environment Agency about how to do interviews, and could not believe that as quite a forward employer, we were still introducing negative biases against our neurodiverse staff by saying things like, you would be expected to maintain eye contact in an interview, and you would be expected to have a consistent thread throughout your answers. What it occurred to me was that we were building in bias into all of our new managers about recruiting neurodiverse staff, and actually making it so that neurodiverse staff were going to find it much more difficult. So one of the things that have picked up is that challenge around that, and working now with the EDI teams and the HR teams to actually look at that guidance around the interviews and get that rewritten. This training was all about trying to reduce bias and get us to be better interviewers, and actually found it was having the exact opposite effect when we looked at neurodiversity, and that strikes me as a problem. So networks also provide support to managers and colleagues to help them better understand their colleagues and what they can do to improve the lives of those with neurodiverse conditions. We found substantial numbers of members attending our Autism and ADHD month events that we put on in the 2 different months respectively. But what really struck me was the number of staff that weren't identifying as neurodiverse that came along to these sessions to learn more and find out about what it meant to be neurodiverse. That just fills me with hope and joy for the future. We started the network in 2018, and we've now got about 600 or 700 members in the network. Now, I'm going to move on to how people can access support. So for our network, we have a very open policy that anyone with the DEFRA group can be a member of our network. We have a vibrant Yammer community where there are lots of self-support and peer support that kind of goes on. We also have SharePoint sites where we have a lot of resources that are available to people, things like workplace adjustments to neurodiverse staff. What are the suggestions? Because that was one of the massive problems that I had when I was diagnosed. There was no suggestion of what we might be able to do to make my life easier. And I didn't know because I'd struggled for all those years and thought, well, surely there is nothing that you can do to make my life easier, it's just hard. So having all of those resources now, we've got resources around ADHD and autism diagnosis and the diagnosis pathways and support for that, explaining that you don't need a diagnosis, but that a lot of people want a diagnosis to feel the certainty and surety that they've actually got the condition, which is something to be aware of as a colleague, that people don't need those diagnoses to get the reasonable adjustments and to make life better for them. Workplace adjustments are there if there is a reasonable belief in the person and their manager that that workplace adjustment is needed, then that is enough to justify that that workplace adjustment should be in place. We also have a mailbox where people can raise confidential issues. There are 3 co-chairs in the group, and each of us will then, I'm autistic and ADHD, so I'll support anyone. We also have Karen Parker's the autistic lead, and then we have Anna Parr, who is the ADHD lead, and so they will then speak to people respectively that have either autism or ADHD. We can provide that one-to-one support for people phoning up and saying, I've got a workplace adjustments interview tomorrow. I have no idea what to expect. I'm really scared. Could I just talk to someone, please? And actually having the 3 of us means that we've got the resource to one of us to pick that up and be able to do it that day and respond and provide that support. The large events that we put on are great for the outreach, but then that individual support for the members gives them the confidence to then go on and do some amazing things. And I think that's my takeaway, that networks allow neurodiverse staff a place where they can share stuff, learn stuff, and build confidence. Because actually, with a world that's not designed for neurodiverse individuals in mind, it's very stressful just living on a daily basis.
So, hello. I'm Francesca. I'm a woman, a daughter, a sister, a wife, a friend to many, and I'm dyslexic. My mum had noticed very early on that I wasn't picking up or learning at school the same way that my siblings were. I really struggled until I was about 14 years old, when I finally got the diagnosis and got the support that I really, really needed. If neurodiversity is affecting the way young people learn at school, I can only recommend please seek help, as it would have made my life so much easier. Since getting the support, I can read, and my spelling has gotten better and better ever since. So why are we talking to you today? We're talking to you because cultures and workplace behaviours are crucial, and in some instances can make or break some people that are struggling with neurodiversity. One of my previous jobs just became really toxic. My line manager was obsessed with my meeting minutes, sent me on 8 courses in a year, and they just weren't getting better to her standard, whereas everyone else was telling me, you've captured the meeting, it's fine, don't worry about it. And unfortunately, it just became too much. I wouldn't want to go to the meetings. I was really feeling anxiety, even taking the minutes. And then the task at the back of your mind that you have to do those minutes, you would just delay, and then panic and worry, and then you still had to do them. So I just had to leave that environment. I now work for an organisation where my line manager was really able to articulate what needed to change within my meeting minutes. Which was remove the she said, he said, they said, and replace it with they discussed and the topic, which is sounds really easy, simple, and actually that's all I needed for the 6 years that I was taking meeting minutes. I just want to make sure that You can also introduce tools to people. So with my line manager, she introduced me to the editing tool on Word. I'm really thankful that that's happened. What I wanted to touch on a little bit today was something that I've recently discovered about myself. My dyslexia fluctuates depending on my mental well-being, and my mum used to call them my clumsy spells, but I never linked that actually it was linked to neurodiversity. And so for the past 5 months, my dyslexia has been really impacted in me and the way that I work. I found myself pregnant in January, which was really, really exciting. And I think when you're going through infertility and you feel pregnant, you just have got so many things happening at the back of your mind, and trying to manage that and manage working was just really difficult. And I think that being really proactive and being in that sense of work, and then all of a sudden something's happening at the back of your mind and you can't be proactive and you start forgetting things, you then feel really upset with yourself. So for me, this journey has been really interesting to see how that happens. I then lost the baby, unfortunately. And since being really sick, I just can't work the same that I used to. So I think that those reasonable adjustments are just something that you have to just continue working on and see what you need on 1 week, 1 month. Maybe you don't need anything for 12 months, and then all of a sudden something will happen and you will need those reasonable adjustments. So just really make sure that you continue having those conversations. So I work for CIWEM, and they've actually been really forward-thinking and allowed me to do a phased return to work. And actually sometimes I just need to sleep. So actually not setting my alarm and not coming into a 9 o'clock meeting has been really helpful. So I've set all my meetings for the afternoon. I do like to sleep 12 hours. My husband's really worried because I had to wake up at 6:30 the last 2 days. So just thinking about how you can support the mental well-being, but also how it can impact neurodiversity, because this is something that I've just personally learned myself. And it's been really unstabilizing for me, because I was just kind of thinking, but I can turn around 180 emails a day and I can do this and I can do that. And actually not being able to has just been really upsetting. And Lea and myself know each other, and we do a Friday talk. And actually sharing that and Lea telling me that it happened the same to her it just made me so relieved. Because I just thought, oh my God, can I not work ever again? Is this something that I just can't do anymore? And just knowing that it's a period of time, it's a phase, and I will get back to normal dyslexia. So I've just got a little bit of a top tip really, just to kind of maybe help ourselves. So first rule, do not assume anyone is neurodivergent. I think that sometimes we think, oh, they can't really spell, are they dyslexic? Let's just not do that. If someone informs you that they are neurodivergent, be open and ask questions. Being neurodivergent doesn't mean the same rule will apply to all. Inform yourself on what is available within your workplace to make reasonable adjustments. However, please know that not all companies will have policies, therefore please try and implement what you can to support that colleague. And influence your organisation, so potentially do start creating those policies. If you are going to give feedback to someone about how they write, make sure it's precise and explain what needs to be done going forward. If you have feedback on grammar and spelling, try and introduce tools, as simply telling someone who struggles with writing that they misspell is not useful, helpful, or could just upset the person opposite you. Try and create a trusting environment, as you may notice when they are overwhelmed that specific traits might fluctuate and they may need additional support. Neurodiversity is difficult to explain, and the person that is neurodivergent might not know everything about their symptoms, so please just keep the conversation open and check in. If all managers had this approach, I can guarantee we would create a better way of working and create a better culture. And researchers show that neurotypical people would also benefit from this approach and just perform better.
You're listening to a special episode of Planet Possible all about neurodiversity, and we're bringing you all the key moments from a neurodiversity workshop at the recent Flood and Coast Conference. I was at the workshop myself and I found it to be both inspiring and really useful. And I went away thinking about ways that I can improve and also help the places that I work create a more inclusive environment too. After the session, I talked to some of the people in the audience to find out what they thought about what they'd heard. And first, I spoke to Bethan Flynn from the Environment Agency.
I think be curious, to have those open and honest conversations and to keep having them. Hearing the speakers' real life experiences, I think it's different to my lived experience, and I think hearing those makes me think how different people experience things. So to take on board how other people are feeling and how that's different for everybody, for every individual.
Sharon Blees of Coastal Partnership East. For me, as a conference organiser, it's how to include that in events, providing the right sort of information beforehand so it's a little bit more inclusive. I hadn't even considered that, which is appalling given that I'm a trustee of a Riding for the Disabled charity. All of our customers, all of our participants are all neurodiverse, and this, actually thinking about it in the workplace, it just hadn't transferred. And so for me, that was a huge takeaway. And actually, the speakers today, the things that they shared it was very, very moving, but actually put things into context enormously. And also, as a manager and thinking about the interviews, I need to be thinking more about that so that we're making sure we're just not being biased without meaning to be biased.
Next to give me their thoughts was Sharon Richardson, also from Coastal Partnership East.
Something that identifies with me is I have 2 teenagers who are undiagnosed, but I do believe that there is neurodivergence there. And something that Rai said about saying things back to you and not being offended by it is something that I have experienced with my son. And I have found it sounds awful, but annoying and difficult, and thought that he was, being challenging. It was a light bulb moment. I kind of went, okay, maybe I get that a bit more now. But similar to Sharon, and same with my son, is providing that information, the pictures of people and anything that you can. But a big takeaway is that anything that you can do for neurodivergent people actually makes, life better for everybody. If we all had that bit more information and a little bit more understanding, then life would be better for all, really. Yeah, so let's do all these things.
So finally, it's time for the regular Planet Possible magic wand. You're about to hear what speakers Lea, Rai and Zoe want to make possible. But first, I got the thoughts of one of the youngest fellows at CIWEM.
Hi, I'm Emily Clarke. I am a Water and Environmental Manager at Binnies Consultancy, and I am a Fellow of CIWEM.
Emily, we've just had an extraordinary session here at Flood and Coast on neurodiversity. So if I were to pass you the Planet Possible neurodiversity magic wand, what would you want to make possible?
It's recognising that everyone is different and everyone will have their own needs and their own requirements. And in my experience, I have been asked several times throughout my life and my career, what reasonable adjustments do you need? What do you need? Just tell me what you need and I'll do it. But I've not always known what I need and what is available. So I would love to wave the wand to have every workplace have suggestions, so it could be like a menu of options, and so people wouldn't necessarily go through and tick off every single one, but there would be something there to start the conversation to say these are the types of things that we know that we can provide, such as noise cancelling headphones, a quiet space, flexible working hours, home working contracts, those kinds of things. If you have something to start the conversation, then they will be empowered to then come and talk to you about other things that they may need. Please don't just have the onus on the individual to tell you what they need. Do some research as well around the topic and see whether there's something that you can do to suggest to help. Things will change over time, so keep that conversation open, keep it flowing, empower people to be open and brave and communicate their needs as and when they need to.
Hi, I'm Rai Hastie. I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, autistic, have suspected ADHD, generalised anxiety disorder, dyslexia, dyspraxia. Oh, I might have already said that. And I am the co-chair of the Autism and ADHD Network at the Environment Agency. The thing that I would really like to see is a review of all of the policies and processes and instantly make them take account of neurodiverse staff and think about neurodiversity in their very construction, because of the fact that actually I found quite a lot of issues with policy documents and things like that not being written in a way that is inclusive for neurodiverse staff.
If there was one element of policy or one sort of structural barrier that you could immediately change, what would that be?
The recruitment process. Straight away, the fact that the recruitment process at the moment still introduces inherent bias against neurodiverse staff instead of trying to increase our numbers of staff with neurodiversity kind of makes me a little sad, and also gives me the energy and focus to want to move forward and change that.
I'm Zoe Brunswick and I'm the Group HR Director for RSK Group. It would be about education, making sure that all children have opportunities, and I think there's so many barriers within education for children to progress to employment in neurodiversity, and that for me is a real, it's really sad that, children don't have those opportunities and they can drop out of the education system. So I'd love to see more training and more awareness there, which is what's happening in the private sector.
So if we think specifically about education, and you just talked in that session, really powerfully about your own journey, what kind of things specifically would you want to see within schools changing to be able to enable all children to have better access to the workplace?
More support for parents who are going through that, to help them understand what they're dealing with. I think more support for children. There's just not enough resources within schools to support them, and therefore many parents end up taking children out of mainstream education or out of education in total, and that's a real concern. I think just more acceptance as well from other parents. Your child isn't naughty, they've got a neurodivergent condition, and therefore, they need reasonable adjustments in the same way a child with a physical disability does. So I think we just need to move the world on.
My name's Lea Nightingale, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm CIEEM's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Engagement Officer. I think what I'd like to make possible is proper funding for the work that we do within the EDI sphere. There is a lot of reliance on unpaid emotional labour from individuals who live and work within historically marginalised communities. And I think by ring-fencing funding to actually give EDI the legitimacy that it requires would go a long way to actually furthering the cause and show that this really is something that all organisations need to have in their budget reviews, because they are benefiting from our free labour, and we really need to start saying, no, we won't do free labour anymore. We will actually be asking for funding, because this is ultimately going to be benefiting your organisations.
Talk to me about what it is that you would want to see that look like in practice.
Particularly working for a consultancy, we have a lot of timesheet issues. If you don't have your prerequisite number of hours, you're then doing all of the EDI work outside of your hours. And so it really is making sure that there is a project code, a fund code that you can book your time to, so that companies can actually track the labour that's going into advancing their EDI objectives.
As ever, time has flown by, and here we are at the end of another episode of Planet Possible. Thank you for joining us. I really hope you found the conversation insightful and it's given you something to think about in your world. You can subscribe to the pod on your usual podcast player to never miss an episode, and we'd love to hear your ratings and reviews too. All that leaves me to say is a huge thank you to our guests today, Francesca Brahmbhatt, Lea Nightingale, Rai Hastie, Zoe Brunswick and Emily Clarke. That's it, everyone. Stay safe. See you next time.
Planet Possible is produced by Bulb. BWLB Bulb. The best ideas, the strongest content.